It never gets easier to look up the horrors of what real-life humans are willing to perpetrate, but some of them are harder than others. Looking into the purported Scottish myth that inspired The Hills Have Eyes, for example, is a whole heck of a lot easier to do than find out the absolutely abysmal crimes that were committed against a young girl in The Girl Next Door. Sadly, today's movie, Snowtown Murders, is a lot closer to the sickening facts that happened to the girl next door. While Australia already got our notorious spotlight shined on the fictional Mick Taylor, who was a composite of the two backpack killers, today we'll look at the man who is known as the country's worst serial killer and unpack what he did and who with. The movie is a hard watch and a true story that was harder to read. Look out for any suspicious looking barrels as we find out what really happened to the Snowtown Murders. The Snowtown Murders, or just Snowtown, was announced by Screen Australia as an important film that they would be funding in 2010. Screen Australia is the principal government film funding operation for the country that goes for movies about Australia and made by Australia. 2 books were the basis of the screenplay, with Debbie Marshall's Killing for Pleasure, the definitive story of the Snowtown Murders, and Andrew McCary's Snowtown Murders, the real story behind the bodies in the barrel killings. The screenplay and story for the movie was written by Justin Kurtzel and Sean Grant. Kurtzel only has this as major screenplay, but directed a few notable movies besides today's powerful stories, such as Macbeth with Marion Cotillard and Michael Fassbender, the forgettable Assassin's Creed adaptation, also with Fassbender, and The True History of the Kelly Gang. Sean Grant has written a handful of movies, including other collaborations with Kurtzel and the Teresa Palmer thriller Berlin Syndrome. Australia has a fun history with horror, including the very successful and still fondly remembered run of Ozploitation movies. Next of Kin, no, not that one, Turkey Shoot, and Road Games are just a few examples of a hell of a run from the 70s and 80s that included slashers, supernatural movies, and even softcore skin flicks. While they never stopped making movies into the 90s and beyond, they both slowed down in release and changed their approach in a lot of ways. From the fun and fantastic of the nihilistic 70s and excesses of the 80s, to the gritty realism of the 2000s with movies like Rogue and the aforementioned Wolf Creek and its sequel. Snowtown isn't your traditional horror movie, but just like the true story it's based off of, it's much more horrifying than some of the other movies we've talked about. A lot of the actors used in the movie were locals to add to the gritty realism of the movie. They weren't professional actors, and even though it came through on the film, it almost adds a documentary-like feel, like Night of the Living Dead. The heart of the movie is Jamie Vlaskis, played by Lucas Pittaway. Pittaway has only done 2 other feature films to go along with tons of shorts, and that's a shame because he has an intensity and star face that could take him anywhere. If he's the heart of the movie, then the dark soul of Snowtown is Daniel Henshaw's John Bunting. Henshaw has turned his star-making role here into a bunch of other roles, including parts in Ghost in the Shell and These Final Hours, while also appearing in the nation's favorite new horror movie, Jennifer Kent's The Babadook. The movie opens with a voiceover and an introduction to the family and main characters of the movie. Jamie, his mother Elizabeth, and his 2 younger brothers and older half-brother Troy all live in the poor area of Salisbury. Elizabeth is dating a man, Jeffrey, who turns out to be a pedophile and takes pictures of the kids, and it's alluded to that he abuses them as well. She finds out and attacks him. He still lives across the street though, but a new man by the name of John is introduced to Elizabeth by her cross-dressing friend Barry. John protects the family and terrorizes Jeffrey with loud noises, defacing of property, and even mangled kangaroo parts until he eventually moves away. John becomes the missing father figure for everyone except Troy, who seems indifferent at best and hates him at worst. John also riles up the rest of the neighborhood to see who is willing to do what to the rest of the alleged pedophiles in town, since the police aren't doing enough. A lot of this movie is painfully, tragically accurate to the real murders and atrocities that the community went through. They used a lot of the same names, with Jamie, Mark, Elizabeth, John, and a few others being named after the real people that were involved. Jamie lived with his mother and his half-brother Troy. Bunting moved onto the same street as the family and was very good at being a cult leader type figure depicted in the film. He was able to get associates to agree with him and talk them into things that would end up putting a lot of them in jail or in the ground. There doesn't seem to be a Barry character in real life, and while there wasn't a pedophile boyfriend of Elizabeth, there was a history of sexual abuse with many of the people that lived in the area. Troy starts a fight with Jamie, but shockingly and horrifically, it turns into a sexual assault perpetrated on Jamie by Troy. John has Barry give up all the names of the supposed pedophiles in the area. John then shaves his head and Jamie's to continue to bond with him, and then asks him why he allows people to push him around and take advantage of him. He then has Jamie practice shooting a gun by killing John's dog that he apparently doesn't care about. Jamie shoots him but is clearly broken up about it, and John has to finish the job. We then hear a recording of Barry saying he's going away for a while on screen we see an ominous slow motion pic of John and one of his associates looking menacing outside. John and Jamie, who is now fully bought in on John's beliefs, go and visit another supposed pedophile and his mother, even though the mom says he's harmless. While it happened earlier in his life, Jamie did confide in Bunting that Troy had assaulted him when he was 13. While there wasn't a Barry in real life to give up the names, instead Bunting would just pick people at random to accuse them of the crimes. He was prejudiced against people with weight problems and homosexuals, and the fact that he was sexually assaulted when he was younger only helped fuel his anger. While I couldn't find anything in the realm of the dog shooting scene, Bunting definitely had Jamie, as well as a lot of other members of the community, under his spell. He also worked at an abattoir and claimed that killing animals was the best part of the job. Finally, in regards to that chilling voicemail from Barry, that was how Bunting would stay under the radar, as he had all of the victims after a certain point create these. The relationship between John and Elizabeth has become rocky, but the hold over Jamie from Bunting is still very strong. Jamie comes home late with Bunting, watching the other kids, and when Jamie asks what happened to his hand, Bunting casually walks him outside and shows him the dead body of his friend, who was a heroin junkie and got Jamie hooked too. He also shows him Barry and tells him to man up when he starts throwing up. Jamie is forced to help cover up and Bunting holds court again, but has a meaner streak this time. Things continue to escalate and Bunting wakes up Jamie to show him Troy, and they proceed to torture and murder him with Jamie's help, while also recording another message to explain that he's going away for a while. The scene goes on for an excruciatingly long time until Jamie is the one to deliver the killing blow. One of the victims was indeed a drug addict who also got Jamie addicted to heroin. Troy also met an eerily similar fate, with the men waking him up with an attack and killing him. While Jamie in the movie is seemingly a much more sympathetic person, and at times a victim himself, he helped Bunting with a lot more than the actual killings to get financial information from the other victims. In some horrifying attention to detail, many of the deaths were as awful as what we see Troy go through, even if it's the only one we see on film. I think that's best for everyone making it through this movie. It also adds more shock value when most of the killing happens off-screen, and then we see a full-on murder that lasts an uncomfortable amount of time. The cycle of violence continues with now seemingly anyone chosen to be killed. Mentally challenged, overweight, and even just homosexual victims are picked by Bunting and executed. Jamie continues to fall deeper and deeper into either depression or apathy, depending on how you look at it. Mark Hayden, one of the main accomplices, admits that he drunkenly told his wife about everything they'd done. This leads to her murder, and then Jamie leading his stepbrother to an abandoned bank vault in Snowtown, where he is killed as the movie ends. The movie even draws out the trip to go look at a computer for a long time, where Jamie has a chance to change his mind, but he doesn't. This last section of film is probably the closest to real life. Mark did tell his wife everything and admitted to the fact. Bunting killed her, and Mark apparently laughed when he saw the body, showing how deep into the Bunting cult he was. Jamie also helped get all the financial information from the victims, which allowed Bunting to collect money to both support himself and spend on things to keep his followers happy. The lure of a cheap computer in the late 90s was in fact what got Jamie's stepbrother David out to the bank, and he was the last victim. Chillingly, Bunting and Robert Wagner, who was Bunting's main accomplice, cut off, fried up, and ate a piece of David before putting the rest of him in the barrel. The movie tells us what happened to everyone, but when the barrels were found, Wagner and Bunting were given multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, and Jamie would get his life sentences as well, but with some parole options down the line after helping the police. His mother would die of cancer shortly after the three men were taken into custody. The shock remains the most brutal killings in the country's history, and the movie is very close to what actually happened. That fact makes the movie one of those that you should watch once, but may never want to again. Snowtown does an almost too accurate job of showing us what really happened in Australia during the 90s.